authority. Think for yourself. Question authority.
Sir Adam Green, I'm happy to see you again. This time, I think we can focus more on religion out of my fear of the consequences of talking about politics. As much as I love politics and what's going on right now, I'm going to try to keep us in a PG realm, which you have tons to say in that realm.
I'm always PG.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Sometimes 13.
But yeah, religion and politics do have a lot of overlap these days, right?
Yeah, we talk about topics that make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know,
people ask what I do or like what my channel's about. I say religion and politics and news.
Yeah, yeah.
The things you're not allowed to talk about at the dinner table in polite company.
Precisely. And that's our job, is to provide an outlet for that. And so I'd like to start us out with a quote. This is, I don't know how to say his right name, Eugen Düring. But I must go one step further. Those who want to hold on to the Christian tradition are not in a position to turn emphatically against Judaism. Historical Christianity, considered in its true spirit, was certainly a reaction within Judaism against Judaism itself, but it nevertheless emerged from within it. And I think this is a great way to, in a strong way, to represent how, despite Christianity not being absolutely exactly what Judaism is, they have differences, and in a lot of ways Christianity has its own autonomy. It isn't directly receiving commands from Judaism. It is built in it was created in the first place in a manner where it cooperates with Judaism, despite the things we read in the Gospel of John that seem so anti-Judaism. And there is this infighting, but at the same time, because of its nature and how it was constructed, Christianity plays ball in a way with Judaism.
You know, the best way to describe it is just the way that it was described in the Bible, and where the whole idea for it actually originated. The origins of it is it's an offshoot, it's a shoot, and it's a branch. It's a branch of Judaism. It's, from what we know, Paul's innovation on Judaism, making it available to the Gentile world. So it's still Messianic, apocalyptic Judaism, but for the nations. And that was always the goal of the Messiah, is to have the nations put their hope in him, and every knee will bow, and all the nations worship the God of Israel through his servants and his branch, the Davidic Messiah. That's what I want to get into today, the midrash of the branch, the servant, and the rod, the star, the sun, all of these different terms, overlapping themes, connecting different verses, ancient sectarians searching the scriptures for God's hidden mysteries and secrets about their redemption. And you can see the connections they made and what inspired it and what motivated them. And I got 4 first century BCE texts that show the development towards Christianity. And
let's see.
I got to read the highlights of the quotes. This is what I've just been covering. So it's First Enoch, mostly 48 and 62, 46, 48 and 62. There's the Wisdom of Solomon. There's the Psalms of Solomon, both in Septuagints, and the pierced Messiah scroll in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you can see the development of the messianic expectations that ultimately culminated in the Jesus myth, connecting just like a network of passages with overlapping themes and terms, like Zechariah, Isaiah, Psalms, and Daniel. That's the core. And from out of that, you can read the whole fundamental core of the Jesus story.
Yeah, let's look at, I prepared a very basic timeline that it's not necessarily precisely what I think, but I tried to create a very basic timeline. What we have here is the time period, historical events, Judaism at the time, Christian Judaism, and then Gentile Judaism. Obviously, it starts out with, it's just the regular Judaism, which, as you know, already had this divergence. It had multiple divergence and splits. We had the Hellenistic influence, Alexander the Great comes in. There's all these new ideas from Greek philosophy. We've got guys like Philo of Alexandria. And so there was already this contention at this point. And then, and we already have evidence, as I said on your show, Philo of Alexandria, I think there's 3 times where he talks about vaguely Gentiles half converting to Judaism. He describes it in a way that it seems like Christianity in a way. They probably didn't have the Jesus character yet, possibly, who knows, but it seems like they already had the Noahide tradition. And then when we get to this next stage, the Roman occupation is beginning. We've got apocalyptic groups awaiting an earthly Messiah, as you say. There was, we read in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's hints of this sort of messianic thing. And then we see the Jewish Christians, whom are distinct. Now, this is sort of assuming, I think this is more assuming the historical side. And so we have the Gentiles and the Jewish Christians are coexisting for a while, it seems. And this got all messed up. I'll fix it in post. But we can see how there were these 2 distinct factions within Christianity for a while, and they diverged. We've got these gospels, like there's the gospel of Ebionites, which is the most Jewish. Yeah, they're the ones that are vegetarian. Then we have the gospel of Nazarenes, which is Torah observant. The gospel of the Hebrews, which is Torah observant. So we have these traces of this true Jewish Christianity, and they coexisted with this Noahide Christianity beside it. And then what my question is to you, when do you think, like, the transition is so fascinating, when it became to where the Gentiles sort of overpopulate the Jews, or it sort of converges? What do you think that transition was?
What I've heard, I believe most scholars would probably agree. I think it's around the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt.
Right.
The revolt, the Christians not fighting because they already thought Jesus was the Messiah, not the star Bar Kokhba. Jesus was the star, not son of the star, which is Bar's son, Kokhba's star. And since on the Numbers 24 prophecy, the star will come out of Jacob. So that, and then when they lost, the Gentile Christians didn't want to be associated with them because they were the rebels Jews that just lost. So that was where the split distinction really started to increase.
Yeah, that's the distinction from the regular Judaism and the Christian Judaism. They are seen as traitors. They don't help with the revolt. But what's also interesting is the transition from Jewish Christianity and Gentile Christianity coexisting as like these 2 factions. And then all of a sudden it's this transition to it becoming Gentile Christianity. And now we do have Jews for Jesus as some strange anomaly these days, but for the longest time,
there's actually about as many Jews for Jesus in the world as there are ultra-Orthodox in Judaism.
That's, incredible. Still many more Gentile Christians, obviously, though. And so that's fascinating to me, that this process of it, there being these 2 factions that are sort of tolerant of each other. We see Paul say, well, first off, I don't know if you read this whole thing that Paul isn't even real. But I don't know enough about it to comment on it, but I'm going to assume for now that Paul is real. So Paul says that he was given the gospel to the Gentiles, and that Peter and the others were given the gospel to the Jews. And so like he's implying that from the get-go, there was the Noahide faction for Barnabas and Paul, and then the real faction was Jewish Christianity. And so it's just fascinating to me, this transition to where that fades out.
Yeah, and it lasted on for centuries, though, as well, I believe, but just it wasn't very big.
Yeah, so it says like the Ebionites, that's from the 5th century. That's where the last mention is. Same with the Gospel of Nazarenes.
A lot of these texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Ebionites had anti-temple sacrifice sentiments as well. It's because they were sectarians. They were critical of the establishment, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and their involvement with Rome. And They were blaming them and their sins and not following the law right or whatever for why Jesus or their Messiah had not come to redeem them from the Roman occupation.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I can see how, it's almost, it's an adaptation to the anti-Semitism. So there's already this anger towards, there's the persecution they're receiving. So if I'm a normal Jewish Christian, there's an incentive to maybe go to the Gentile side. That's going to be the more appealing side. So I'm sure a lot of them might have even sort of like downgraded to Gentile Christianity. Maybe it's easier, more appealing. I don't know. But to me, that's the most fascinating transition, is how this became Gentile Christianity.
Well, you can see all the verses that in Paul's letters. He writes about, he shows like the Midrashic influence of why he believed it was for the Gentiles. That's his
the Pauline Christianity. I know that. I mean, like later on, centuries later, there's still Jewish Christianity that obey the Torah. That fading out.
Probably, Orthodoxy. As Orthodoxy got more power, they destroyed all of the heretical sects. And I don't think it was just one. It wasn't just like them and one Jewish, the Christians, proto-Orthodox, and one Jewish faction. I think these were Messianic memes, and lots of different groups were believing in these Messianic memes.
Yeah.
So we have all these other apocrypha stories about Jesus and stuff. Those weren't Christians either. They're still doing the same thing that led to the creation of the Gospels in the New Testament. Writing fan fictions. That's what Nag Hammadi is about Jesus, basically. Fan fictions on Scripture.
Yeah. And do you think, so when you see Josephus wrote about John the Baptist and James and Jesus of Nazareth and whatnot, do you think that the Gospel of Mark was sort of using those characters and putting them in a comic book? Or what are your thoughts on that? Like this connection between the Gospel of Mark and these characters that Josephus is writing about. Do you think that was added much later as a response to the Gospel of Mark? I think it's
they always want to date. Have you heard they think that Luke incorporated some of Josephus's material, right? But who's to say maybe the same exact material isn't in Mark, and that's why. But yeah, Mark could be dated after Josephus in 90, and so they always want to date it right after the temple destruction, and then say the rest of the Gospels were later in the first century. But I guess Mark could have been after Josephus. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like Bart Ehrman thinks that Josephus had heard about the Christian characters through oral tales and put it in as history. But then I think Price thinks that the Gospel of Mark is seeing the Josephus, because they think Mark is later. I think Carrier does too. They date Mark later than 70. And so they think it's like,
that's where he learned about Pilate.
Yeah. So Josephus has Jesus ben Ananias, John the Baptist, all these characters. And he melds that with stuff that
I'm
Paul
down with
says.
that. Mark could be after Josephus for sure. What's pushing it back another 20 years?
Yeah, if you push
I don't know
it
if
back
there's.
a little
I haven't
bit,
thought if there's an argument of why Mark has to be in the 70s.
Yeah, it's definitely not clear. We know that. But so if you look at it, Mark, there's almost nothing novel in it. The first Gospel of Mark is rewritten stuff from the Torah. It's clearly inspired from the Torah, and then it's inspired by
the Son of Man.
If it's inspired by Jesus ben Ananias, then that's a lot of gospel. Just the idea of going through a trial, and then stuff that Paul says, Jesus says, to such a crazy degree. Like Paul screams out when he's being executed. Similar. It's just not only things that Paul says does Jesus say, but things that happen to Paul. Similar things happen to Jesus. And so it's like when you take away everything, there's like 10% left. And who knows, maybe that was inspired by something else. It just, it all together seems
like Greek tales and Romulus stuff, possibly.
Right.
Like anything that's not just a fulfillment or a retelling of Jewish literature and scripture is probably some kind of pagan incorporation. Also, what's in Mark, obviously heavily inspired, is Jesus as the Son of Man. And in Paul's letters, he never identifies him as the Son of Man. In fact, I don't know if any of the rest of the New Testament does besides the Gospels. I think Paul believed Jesus was the Son of Man, but he didn't specifically mention it, right? But it's the Son of Man is 14 times in Mark. And the Son of Man is key to the development. The Son of Man being connected to the servant of Isaiah, and the branch in Zechariah is associated with the servant. This is the key. And this is why the historicists like Bart Ehrman say that Jesus must have existed, because they would have nobody was looking at Isaiah, the servant of Isaiah, as the Messiah until Jesus was crucified. And then his followers coped and went and made that connection and connected that to the Son of Man. But I don't think that's true. We see the Son of Man being connected with the servant of Isaiah and the servant songs in First Enoch, which is pre-Christian. So if they were already making that connection, that's the origin of where the Jesus dying Messiah comes from, and no historical Jesus necessary.
Yeah. And so it's, like you see the effort to fulfill the prophecies. In the same way, I lived in New York, you would see they have this wire that they put around Brooklyn so that it changes their Sabbath laws. And there's always this like desire. We see in today, the practitioners of Judaism do their best to just fool God. And so it's like, was that what they were trying to do? Like, are they just trying to get to the next step? It's like the grift from Judaism is, if all of this happens, you get to have the world and all. And it's like, they're just trying to figure out.
I don't think it's duping God, though. I think it's just like typical Jewish mysticism. Like Paul says, he's caught up into the third. It's mysticism, Midrashic, like Pesherim, creating Pesher stories, creating mythologies. It's Merkava mysticism, Ezekiel's chariot type of stuff. That's what Paul is describing in his caught up to heaven thing. That's the original earliest layers of the New Testament, is a heavenly celestial angel Jesus that's ascending through the heavens and in the heavenly temple in Hebrews, and the heavenly high priest Melchizedek. So it's just mystical, esoteric reading, midrashically connecting different verses, searching for fan fiction Bible code connections.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from.
So like the question is, because you do a lot of stuff on prophecies and how Christianity seems to either accidentally or purposefully in its design cooperate with this sort of cyclical end of days. It seems to always be the end times, and Christianity just so happens to always sort of cooperate. And whether that's a mistake or whether that's planned is, I don't know, but you definitely have a point there. If that were the case, let's pretend, like the architects of Christianity somehow were such masterminds that they were creating the end times of Christianity to sort of cooperate with the end times grift of Judaism. Like, it's almost like I want to.
I don't think the original author. Sorry, I don't think the original author of Revelation like intended on John Hagee and Christians United for Israel, like rapture, helping rebuild. I don't think they planned out meticulously all those details. They're writing about something else in a completely different context, like in code, it's completely dependent on interpretation after the fact and reinterpretation for what's going on in their current times.
So it's sort of, do you think it accidentally plays this game of
I wouldn't say it's accidental. I'd say it's more like a hyperstition phenomena of belief in prophecy and predicting the future, and these scriptures having magical predictive powers. Right. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, it's like, reading tea leaves or Rorschach or like you have this semblance. So I used to love the I Ching. The I Ching? It's this Chinese book. They say Confucius finished it or whatever, and you throw some coins and then you read a part of the I Ching. And if you read it and you're a sentimental, agreeable person that's not highly skeptical, it's like a fortune telling machine. It's a book. You flip a bunch of coins and it'll give you this like vague fortune cookie like thing. And when you're in that believing mindset, you just go, oh my God. And it could say like the trees will come with the wind and the fire or whatever. And you just find meaning within it. And so it's like, regardless of what we're in. So like in the First Crusade, I've got some quotes here. A Christian leader had said, "The time of the Antichrist is at hand. The crusade is the beginning of the end, where Jerusalem's liberation will usher in the final battle." And a Jewish leader at the same time said, "These tribulations are the birth pangs of the Messiah. The nations will rise against us as foretold." And then the same thing happened in every other crusade. You could find a quote from every crusade. In the 30 Years' War, Christians were saying, here are the end times. This guy's the Antichrist. They said Napoleon's the Antichrist. And so it's like, regardless of what situation we're in, we could be in some futuristic situation one day. And if we take this scripture, we can find, oh, this guy's the Antichrist. This guy's the Messiah. And it's like this forever grift, this cyclical game we're caught in.
Well, just like today, Christians will say that they've met Jesus, they've seen Jesus, they know Jesus, they walk with Jesus, right? Ancient Jews would have been doing the same thing. In fact, way more so, because they didn't understand brains and dreaming and hallucinations and all the stuff that we know that could explain stuff like that today, right? So I even know if ancient Jews for hundreds of years are scouring the scriptures for hidden messages and believing that they can ignore the original context and reinterpret it as like mystically and esoterically, and then we can see all these different scriptures which they knew, they were obsessed with. They knew the Bible inside and out. They meditated and prayed on these scriptures, right? It was their whole lives, the most brilliant minds of that time that ended up writing these scrolls and making these connections, right? They're reading all these different interconnected messianic verses that sound like they're talking about the same things or the same figures. And then when I'll do this, if we could easily look at Daniel and Isaiah and Psalms and Zechariah and see these overlapping themes, and then so I'll be doing this, writing this for the book or listening to Richard Carrier's book, and then I go to sleep at night and I'm dreaming about all of these different things. And then this is what it looks like. The dream looks like all of these different connections between the different scriptures. And you think, oh, they're secretly all talking about God's hidden Son of Man that will be revealed to the elect in the end times, which is what the scriptures say. So this is one of the Midrash documents I've made. So Jesus basically is just cherry picked and quote mined from different Old Testament scriptures here. And when you read it and you see the context and you see the surrounding verses every single time, it's all like this. I will be a light to the Gentiles. Salvation will reach the ends of the earth. Kings will see you and stand up. Princes will see you and bow down. It's about conquering the princes. You can see in the Septuagint, the Psalm of Psalms, look at this. So the nations shall come from the ends of the earth. So the Psalms of Solomon, right? It's in the Septuagint. It says that this messianic Davidic king figure will be a shepherd. He will be pure from sin. All nations shall be in fear before him. He will smite the earth with the word of his mouth. So ancient Jews looking for hidden messages in the scriptures, this seems like a Messiah is going to rule not with a military, but with his teachings, with the word, with the scriptures. Right? Okay. The judge, he will be a judge. He shall have the heathen nations to serve him under his yoke. Nations shall come from the ends of the earth to see his glory. This is a first century AD text.
Yeah. So this tees it up.
He shall destroy the godless nations with the word of his mouth, and rebuke the nations shall see before him, and he shall reprove sinners for the thoughts of their heart.
Yeah, it's as if like Christian Judaism was the peak of the progressive Hellenistic root of Judaism. It peaked within what you're showing, like it led to this cosmic character and then adapted to the human form of Jesus, it seems. Like this was
euhemerized and placed in a historical context. Like Isaiah, like Paul says in Romans, citing Isaiah 11, the root of Jesse will spring up one who will arise to rule over the nations. In the Gentiles, in him the Gentiles will hope, which is a citation of the servant of Isaiah 42, the first servant song. My servant, chosen one, he will bring justice to the nations. The islands or the nations will put their hope. That's what Paul's citing there. And that's cited in Matthew as well. I thought I had it. Oh, yeah, right here. Citing that verse exactly, Matthew 12. As the prophet Isaiah said, my servant, justice to the nations, in him the nations will put their hope. So where did they get the idea of that the Gentiles are to believe in the Messiah and that the Jews are to reject him? You can go to Wisdom of Solomon, another first century text, where it says that they were blinded by their wickedness and did not understand God's mystery when they condemned the man who calls himself the Son of God to a shameful death. All Wisdom of Solomon. Can I go there?
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense to me that it led to that. And I think the question is, well, one of the questions is like the relation between, I know we've already gone over how, there was already a split at that revolt. The Christian Jews didn't take part. They were pacified by this religion. But throughout this course of time, has there been a connection between the two religions? Yes. We know there are times where, obviously, a lot of the e-crusaders like to talk about the Schofield Bible as one obvious thing. But like, we could make a timeline showing that, yeah, there were times where the Christians persecuted. They had forced conversions. They had forced migrations and whatnot. But was there a connection later on where they maybe started cooperating more? Well, like, what do you think? It's just all sort of coincidental or whatever? Do you think there is a direct connection between the two, you think?
Like the origins of Christianity and how it branched off from Jewish Judaism to Gentile Judaism, it's kind of explained in Paul's letters, but it's also kind of explained in Acts. Like there's Acts 15 where there's the Jerusalem Council of James and Peter saying, yes, Paul, you can go to the Gentiles, have them follow the Messiah and the God of Israel, and these like laws that a lot of people associate with the 7 Noahide laws, proto 7 Noahide laws. Right. But there's also the interesting text, the secret Jewish life of Jesus, the Todoth Yeshu. And in that story, they say like there was a Messianic Jesus movement within Judaism, and some of the establishment saw it as a threat within Judaism. So they took it away and separated it and made it pagan and took it to the Gentiles. So it wouldn't be a temptation to the rest of the Jewish community. That's their explanation of the origin story. That Peter was a double agent that took it away to save Israel, like sacrificed himself to save Israel from this heretical, false, mythical messianic figure, basically.
And then, but later down the line, we see the Spanish Inquisition. There were conversos, like crypto rabbis turning into Christian leaders. You could see how that you could make the transition. The Old Testament pretty well. We see like
wouldn't Peter be the original then if he became the first Pope of Rome?
So do you think did that abruptly end after him? Because I'm almost thinking like, because I've seen the clips, in the See Through It All and your clips of rabbis admitting that. But I'm more trying to see, where did that end? Did that just abruptly end in the 2nd century, or because we see all of the, like, we could build a timeline where there's conversos in Spain, there's Protestant reformers engaging with Jewish scholars in the 16th century. We see like these interactions, and so we can make a list of all the times Christianity was negative towards Judaism. But then there's this longer list of times where there seems to be not collaboration directly, but they're fairly cooperative for the most part. As if there's
in Rome, when Constantine adopted it, a few decades later, paganism was outlawed, but Judaism had protections and was continued still to practice. So I guess you could say there was some understanding. Yeah. St. Augustine cited the Psalms and said, like, you should let them continue following their religion. And many popes did declarations about, like, no more forced conversions. Don't force to convert them. Allow them to still practice Judaism. So there were protections while paganism was stamped out across, everywhere in the path of the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah, and another pattern I've seen when I look at the timelines of the conflicts and then the collaborations, you see a lot of the conflicts were like peasants freaking out and being anti-Semitic. There were Christian leaders that were clearly calling for persecution and whatnot, but a lot of it seems to be the Christians, the commoners, having anger, and then the leaders are condemning it.
Right.
So,
exactly.
and that might, I'm not trying to say that they're literally calling each other like the rabbis and the priests are, but I'm curious as to whether these connections are coincidental out of the nature of Christianity, because Christianity is so about peace and love. Like I'm just trying to see, like,
well, in Christianity too, Judaism has to survive until the end of times. They still play a central and important role in the end times and the return of Jesus that they're supposed to convert in the end. That means in Christianity, like, the Jews are to reject Jesus. That is what the prophecies told. They almost get off on it, right? And they're blinded, and their hearts were hardened, and they stumbled. But Paul says, have they been abandoned? God forbid, and that all of Israel will be saved in the end. So, Christians are really just Jews are like in their exile, but in the end they're supposed to keep following Judaism, but in the end they'll see the truth that Jesus is the Messiah. That's kind of been their view.
And so I had this e-crusader. I'm sure everything I've been told, you've been told 1,000
Do I
times.
need to stop sharing so you could share it?
Yeah, sure. So this one e-crusader said something along the lines of, what you're doing is super Jewish because this is what the Soviets, the Bolsheviks did. They didn't want Christianity. And so getting rid of Christianity is Jewish. And it's like, okay, well, first off, communism is in itself a religion. It's a state religion. And so I'm not promoting communism. And I don't like the idea of using government authority to get rid of a religion. That's the last thing I want. I mean, not the last thing I want, but like, it's not a good thing to outlaw beliefs.
It almost just strengthens it. It's not going to stamp it out. You have to educate people and convince them and persuade them not to follow it, not make it illegal. That's just going to make people harden and double down also. But they wanted full control. They couldn't have any other institution with control also. So that's one of the reasons. But I mean, no, come on, let's get real. If Christianity is a Jewish Messianic movement that believes the Bible and worships the God of Israel, it's not Jewish to oppose that. That's insane if a Christian said that.
It's where I always want to make this not about race. And I always do my best. I start out with that presupposition. I'm like, okay, it has something to do with the religion. And so this is just all a result of religion. But then when I look at the information of like the Bolsheviks and how they got rid of the synagogues, they did, even though they made those anti-Semitic laws, they clearly were not practitioners of Judaism.
I know that the Jews didn't like the Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
They felt persecuted. I saw one Jewish text where it said they called them Amalek. And they had a historical hatred of Russian Orthodox Church and the Tsar and pogroms and stuff. So they would have anti-Christian sentiments too. I'm not denying that at all. I'm sure they did. You said the thing about race or religion, like Christians turn into just as deranged as any rabbi you can find out there that wants everybody to bow down to the Messiah or be cast into the lake of fire.
Right.
I think it all boils down to the Judaism, Yahweh, Messianism, that belief.
When we see these non-Jewish Christian leaders infected with these ideas, they engage in similar behavior. They create isms, they seek control. And so although there is this pattern that ethnic Jews have engaged in all these different isms and pursuits for control, as you said, it's probably because a lot of them were brought up. So Karl Marx was not a religious Jew at the end, but he comes from the religious culture. And so maybe there is this remnant of the culture that leads to the pursuit of control. And so whether you're an atheist Bolshevist, or whether you're a Zionist who's strategically religious, Machiavellian, or whether you're a radical rabbi that we see in these clips, they're all infected with this idea of seeking control.
You know, Karl Marx actually, his family converted to Lutheran Christianity when he was 6 years old.
It is a strong, weird trend that is a whole other can of worms. John Kerry, for instance, his family switched to Christianity. And this goes back to what I was saying. Like,
it's not that big of a switch.
Yeah.
It's just like believing in somebody is the Messiah.
And I saw that his brother converted back to Judaism. So it's real easy to switch back when you're ethnically Jewish. They go, oh, great. You don't have to be a Noahide or anything. We actually want you in when you're ethnically Jewish. And so it's like, because when I started this journey of atheism and trying to understand where Christianity came from, I started treating it like a crime scene. I'm like, okay, I don't want to be like, I would see Richard Dawkins and all these other guys. Their whole thing was, this is absurd. This is so silly. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's silly, but I want names. I want dates. I want information. Let's treat it like we're a detective and this is an ancient crime. And when I got to the bottom of the crime, I'm like, okay, it's a bunch of Jewish guys. And so once you get to that stage and you find out about Judaism, which I wasn't that privy to as a Catholic, I knew about them at a distance. When you research their religion, you're like, oh, they're obsessed with race. And so they make it about race. The Jewish religion is all about the worship of their race. And so that's what ties it unfortunately,
a chosen people ethno-religion for sure.
Yeah. And so it unfortunately is, it's uncomfortable race, but it is vital to this discussion. They make it a part of it. And what makes it relevant to us is that they have this odd thing where they're obsessed with their identity, their cultural identity, but then they have the opposite advice for us. They created this Noahide version of Jewish Christianity that tells people to abandon any sense of identity. And that's not convenient for me. I'm a product. I only exist because of Catholicism. My mom is from the Spanish Catholic side. My dad is from the Irish Catholic side. And so I am a product of this Noahide sort of thing. And so it's not where
my mom and dad met in church.
Yeah. I never wanted this to land on that topic, but it is part of the discussion.
Well, here's the question. Okay. So does the tribal chosen people identity just come directly from the Torah? Or is it like their people that wrote the Torah in this way? But if you look at the origins, like the environment, the climate of the origins of Judaism, it's like, they're oppressed and facing adversity with the Greeks and then with the Romans in the Christian time. So like if they're occupied by the big empire and they're getting crushed and their temples are being destroyed, like these are basically like fantasies. That's what Revelation is. It's basically a mystical fantasy about getting revenge on Rome. The problem is that still 2,000 years later, we see Judaism, they still want revenge on Rome for destroying the temple, and they view Western civilization and Christendom in America and Europe as that Rome. And they've got all these Edom prophecies about that Rome. So that's where it's a problem. Like you can understand, okay, some ancients studying their sacred scriptures, looking for answers and praying for a savior to come and save them from the Romans or the Greeks or whatever other empire, right? So that's what it was birthed out of. But the problem is that carrying on today, still being influenced by that sentiment in the scriptures, is about the desire to have a Messiah rule the world.
Yeah.
At the bottom of it.
It seems to have been the initial architecture of Christianity seems to be the desire to have the best of both worlds. We want to remain exclusive for good reasons. We maintain our cultural identity. We have our sort of breeding program where where our father has something to say about his daughter's husband. And that resulted in this very intelligent group of people. And there's this benefit to the village having something to say about reproduction. And as someone who I have genetic diversity, although I can admit that, of course it's great for athletics. We have enormous amounts of talented people who are mixed. I don't think there's something inherently bad about someone having genetic diversity. In fact, white people, one of the special things about them is that they're part Neanderthal and Denisovan. And I think a lot of the reasons why Europeans are so amazing is from that genetic diversity. However, I can see how there is this good thing about there being a cultural identity and having an actual community. I don't think it should be so strict that no one's allowed to have a bit of mixing, but I can see how there's like a bad intention to the good intentions of Christianity. This idea of there's nothing, there's no Greek or Jew or male or female. Like what? It's almost like this bad intention liberalism that was given to the Gentile Christians.
I mean, to be balanced, I don't think the New Testament is like tells you to go out and just like mix with whoever. It doesn't say that, but it definitely doesn't say the opposite either, that like you can't and you have to only stay within your own, only for the chosen people. As the Bible says, beeping after foreign idols and foreign wives, like that's very frowned upon in the Old Testament for them. In the holy seed that dwells alone is kept separate and is known among the nations. The descendants are known among the nations as God's people. Can I bring it back to this real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a big one I want to show. Okay, so Wisdom of Solomon. Tell me how much this sounds like Jesus, how much this influenced the Jesus myth. So the Jews are waiting for a righteous figure that is contrary to their doings and criticizes them for offending the law or transgressing the Judaism, basically. He claims to have knowledge of God. He called himself the child of the Lord. He makes the boast that God is his father, like Jesus did. And then they say, let us see if his words be true. For if this just man be the Son of God, he will help him and deliver him from the hands of his enemies. Let us examine him with despitefulness and torture. Let us condemn him with a shameful death. Right? So what does that sound like? Does that ring a bell? That's in the New Testament, how Jesus is mocked and tortured. And they say, come down from the cross, right? So this is a reference from Psalms 2. All who see me mock me, they hurl insults, shaking their head. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him. So this Messianic Jesus figure from Wisdom of Solomon that the Jews condemned to a shameful death, and they did not imagine and were deceived, for their own wickedness hath blinded them, just like the Jews in the New Testament. As for the mysteries of God, they knew them not. Paul says exactly that. That's the theme, that they didn't understand God's plan, right? So it's a clear reference to Psalm 22, right? Mock me, hurl insults. We find it in the New Testament also. Go a few verses down in Psalm 22. What does it say? All the ends of what does it say about this figure that Wisdom of Solomon is obviously riffing on? All of the ends of the world shall remember and turn unto the Lord. All the kindreds of the nations shall worship before thee. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor of the nations. And also in that Psalms 22, we get the tie-in with this Wisdom of Solomon shameful death figure with the pierced one. Where is it? Right here. Psalm 22:16. The wicked have enclosed me, they pierced my hands and feet. So there you get the pierced one too, the piercing. And there's a piercing also twice in the Dead Sea Scrolls in Isaiah 53, which the servant there is already connected to the Son of Man in Enoch. And through Zechariah, because Zechariah 3:8, I think I have it here. Zechariah 3:8 to 10. Yeshua, the high priest, like Jesus is the high priest Melchizedek, I will bring forth my servant, the branch. So the branch of Zechariah and Jeremiah, the Davidic branch, is associated with the servant of Isaiah 52, 53, and 42 and 49. And when you go look at Isaiah, the servant of Isaiah 42 and 49, what do you think it's going to say again? You think it's going to say stuff about conquering the the nations.
Hmm.
We already did Isaiah 42. The Gentiles will put their hope all over the world. And Isaiah 49, talking about the nations, the light to the nations. Isaiah 49, I will beckon, 22 to 23. I will beckon the nations. I will lift up my banner to the peoples. They will bow down before you with their, hold on. They will bow down before you with their feet. It's cut off there. They will lick the dust at your feet. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Those who hope in me will not be disappointed. So you see, when you connect this midrash of these themes every single time, this is what it's about. They will bow down before you with their, what is that full word there? Hold on. Isaiah 49:23. It's cut off.
Feet.
To their faces to the earth. They will bow down
okay.
before you with their faces to the earth and lick the dust of your feet. Which is exactly what it says in Isaiah 45 too. All the world will bow down. Every knee will bow. Isaiah 49 in the Hebrew version. They shall bow down before me with their faces toward the earth. They shall know that I am Hashem. So when you look at all of these and how they connect with the servant and the branch and how it's all about conquering, what other conclusion can we come to?
Yeah, I can see how this could lead to the cosmic sort of like what we see in the Hebrews epistle, where it's clearly Jesus is this cosmic character being killed in a cosmic fashion, and then it's sort of getting personified by, especially if Jesus ben Ananias was this separate thing, I could see that as causing enough confusion where it's like, okay, we've got this cosmic Jesus who's killed. Well, let's just sort of combine it with this, or maybe even that inspired Jesus ben Ananias, because we know that story's fake too. That's not an actual story either. It's just folklore. And so
Jesus ben Ananias is folklore?
I asked Richard Carrier, because when I first read about that, I remember I was reading Jesus from Outer Space,
right?
Yeah. And so I asked Richard, I'm like, wait, so is this guy real? And he's like, no, we and I forgot his reasoning, but he said that we know it's not the same Jesus because of the time, and that he's also fake. That's what Richard said. And the new thing
so
is,
now let me show you the tie-in with
ahead.
Enoch, because we haven't showed Enoch, the Son of Man.
Yeah,
the Son of Man in Mark is mentioned 14 times. Jesus as the Son of Man. So let's learn about what they believed about the Son of Man. And then thus Jesus. So we have Daniel 7, Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations, all goyim, and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, pass away. They associated this figure with Daniel 9 also, where there's a reconciliation for iniquity, seal of the vision of prophecy, and the Messiah, the anointed, is cut off. The branch of the prince shall come, and the temple is destroyed. Okay, so where was I going to go? Oh, yeah. So the Son of Man in Enoch, the parables of Enoch, another 1st or 2nd century BCE text. His hair was white like wool. He's hidden. He's hidden and revealed. The Son of Man shall raise up kings and the mighty from their seats and the strong from their thrones. And he shall put down the kings from their thrones because they do not extol and praise him. Here's the best verse, though. Here's 48. So he's the staff to the righteous. The Son of Man shall be the light to the Gentiles. So we have the Son of Man in Daniel 7 now connected to the light to the Gentiles, which is the servant in Isaiah 42 and 49. So there's your pre-Christian connection already of the Son of Man of Daniel with the servant of Isaiah.
Yeah. And when they use the word righteous, they often mean righteous Gentiles, as in cooperative.
No. Zadokим, the righteous, like James the Just. I think that's what it uses. So look at this, though. Also like Jesus. Before the sun and the signs were created, so he's a pre-existent angel and creator. His name was named before the Lord of Spirits. Here we go, though. Again, so Isaiah 49, 42 and 49, both of those verses talk about ruling the Gentiles, and they cite it here. And this is how you know they're connecting it to the the servant. All who dwell on earth shall fall down and worship before him. It's a blueprint to have a one world religion and rule the world. That's what this is. This is what inspired Christianity. Enoch was a seminal text in Christianity. We find it quoted in Jude even. All who dwell on the earth shall fall down and worship before him. That's what light to the nations means. That's what Jesus, as the servant of Isaiah, connected to the branch, also the Davidic king, means. And for this reason, he had chosen and hidden him before the creation of the world. What does Paul say? It's a mystery hidden before the creation of the world, hidden in the scriptures. So they're reading this, they go, he's hidden in the scriptures. And then in Hebrews, it quotes Psalm 40 where it says, here I am, it is written about me in the scroll. So, he's hidden in the scrolls. He's hidden in the text.
Right.
And we can see where they found him. And their only knowledge of Jesus in early Christianity was reading him from out of context, out of their sacred scriptures.
Amazing.
It gets worse. It says the anointed, so he's the Messiah. Hold on, it's over here. Word of his mouth slays all sinners, unrighteous, all the kings and the mighty and the exalted and those who hold earth. They shall see and recognize how he sits on his throne of glory. Righteousness is judged. They shall be terrified. They shall be downcast. Pain shall seize them when they see the Son of Man sitting on the throne of glory. Terrified, trembling in fear is what it says and then when we get the rod, you connect in the rod and Melchizedek, like Jesus is Melchizedek in Hebrews, and that when you tie in Psalm 110, and then when you tie in the son of Psalm 2, both of those texts also all about conquering the Gentiles. In fact, in Psalms of Solomon, it says he will rule with the rod of his mouth. That's probably also a reference to Psalm 2, where it says the same thing and then conquers the Gentiles.
It's like in Revelations when Jesus has a sword coming from his mouth, almost.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a reference of it as well. Look, Psalm 2 talks about the nations conspire. I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. You are my son. Today I become your father. The New Testament and the Dead Sea Scrolls connects that. The Dead Sea Scrolls in Q4, I think it is, says, quotes this, you are my son, I have your father, and connects it directly with the figure of Isaiah 11, the messianic figure there as well. Look at what it says, though. I will make the nations your inheritance and the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. So kings of the earth, the rulers of the earth, serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss his son. How come every single verse, messianic proof text that was inspiring these messianic expectations and these midrashic connections, every single time says this type of ruling the nations?
Yim.
Exactly. Look,
Well,
here we go
it
again.
seems
This
to
is
all-
62, I believe. The Son of Man who was hidden revealed him to the elect. So the apostles like Peter and James and Paul and John, whoever the first apostles, they considered themselves the elect. In fact, Paul even says he's chosen in the womb, which I believe we just read in Isaiah 42 as well. The Son of Man was hidden. The hidden Son of Man theme is so prevalent. Hidden from Satan and his demons when he sacrificed in Ascension of Isaiah in heaven. Okay.
So the
The
apostles
kings and
are
the mighty and the exalted and those who rule the earth shall fall down before him on their faces and worship and set their hope upon that Son of Man. Set their hope upon him, remember, is the language from Isaiah 42. So the servant of Isaiah. So clearly they also believe the servant of Isaiah 53 was this messianic figure without any historical Jesus necessary, like Bart Ehrman claims, that they only did it after the fact. He was crucified and they thought he was the savior, so they looked to Isaiah 53. No, they already viewed it as servant as messianic before Christianity.
Yeah, and so these apostles were the people that had the hallucination or lied about having the Christ revealed to them in a revelation.
Yeah, we don't know if they were being honest, if Paul really believed this figure. You see Christians today, they do the same thing with Bible coding and decoding the Bible and talking about this prophecies being fulfilled with this thing happening in the news. They do it all the time. So I imagine that's just like normal human psychology. And very well, Paul could have been sincere. The first Messianic, mystical, apocalyptic Jews that saw Jesus hidden in the scriptures could have been 100% sincere. Maybe they thought he was real as anything. Just like Christians today think Jesus is real and they know him and they see him and they've
Right.
met him, right?
That seems to be one of the things I have to deal with when I am approached. So every now and then I'm lucky enough to be approached by a Christian converter. And often it's a very common thing. They'll tell you, well, the reason I believe is because I had this experience. One told me I saw crucifixes. The other one told me I saw Jesus speak to me and I quit drugs. And I have a different response to each one. Like for instance, the guy that quit drugs because of Jesus, I'm like, hey, quitting drugs is amazing. And I don't care whether you saw the devil and quit drugs. I'm glad that that experience happened. But you just told me that you were doing drugs for 20 years. And so is there a chance that maybe you had a hallucination? I'm glad it happened. Thank goodness. Thank Jesus, in fact. But I quit drugs. You know, when I was like 18 or whatever, I had a bad summer and I didn't need Jesus for that. It's possible. I quit drinking. I quit cigarettes. Like you could do this without Jesus appearing in front of you. And so I have a different thing, but it's a common thing. People have these hallucinations or dreams and whatnot. And I don't want to just immediately dismiss them as never having it happened. I'm sure something occurred in your mind, but it is very common. So it's not a huge stretch. One thing I wanted to, have you ever seen this part of, let me pull it up, the Talmud, our favorite book. So tell me if you've seen this. Gittin B. So Onkelos went and he conjured Yeshu the Nazarene from the grave. Onkelos said to Yeshu, whom is of importance in that world? Yeshu said to him, Israel, of course. Onkelos further queried, should I attach myself to them? Yeshua said, their welfare you shall seek, their misfortune you shall not seek. For anyone who touches them is regarded as if he were touching the apple of his eye. He said to Yeshu, what is the punishment of that man who seeks their misfortune? Yeshu said to Onkelos, boiling in excrement. As the master said, anyone who mocks the words of the sages will be sentenced to boiling excrement. And so this is all typical Talmud stuff, but it is very interesting. And this is not the only time where like they show practitioners of Judaism summoning a spirit. And so there is a tradition of not only, this is literally saying Yeshu the Nazarene, but there is this tradition of summoning spirits in the Talmud. And so the idea of these original Christians having a revelation, it's like, it's typical. It's actually a thing within Judaism.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. It's proto-Kabbalah. We find it in Kabbalah too, making up all of these supposed stories, you know, cosmic dramas with angels and figures in heaven and God all the time. That was the origins of this messianic figure they saw in scriptures.
So you reacted with Dave Scabina to the part that was personal about you, but I'd love, have you gone over the other parts of me and Richard talking about Noahide laws and Paul? Because it's very,
I believe I might have seen it, but I don't really recall the details. It was a
I'd
while
love
ago.
for
I
us
watched
to
Sure.
react to what he's saying about a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. So the idea that Paul was not just randomly letting in Gentiles. It wasn't just sort of his idea. There's a tradition of allowing in Gentiles according to the rules given to Noah because they're descendants of Noah. And so it's not this random crazy conspiracy. It's actually a tradition in Judaism. And so I presented that to him before he actually, we talked about you personally. So I'd love for us to focus on that since you've already gone over the shade, the roasting. Christianity for the Gentiles. Now, there is this school of thought that all of the things he was trying to do are very closely resembling things that you see in Jewish teaching. So the
Noahide laws, such as, so that I'll read the 7 qualifications for a Noahide religion: no idolatry, no murder, no theft, no sexual immorality, no blasphemy, no blood consumption or flesh from living animal, and established courts of justice. And people say that there's an example of all of these qualifications within the epistles. And so the theory is that Paul was not just some rogue guy deciding, let's make this all for the Gentiles just on a whim. He actually comes from a school of thought. There was the Hillel and Shammai schools, the different synagogues, and Shammai were more orthodox and exclusive, and Paul comes from the Hillel, and they had this whole idea of giving Gentiles their own version of Judaism, which you can ask rabbis today. Rabbis make speeches all the time about you have to get them to obey the Noahide laws. So this isn't some strange thing, but the idea of Paul actually purposely doing it to create these sort of goyim religions. How do you feel about that idea?
Yeah, it's plausible. It's a little, the reality is a little more messy than that, right? So when you look at Paul, when he talks about so he does in several places where he says, like, there is a law written on your heart, and so there are certain laws you should follow that are not Judaism, but are like God's laws, and sort of capture God's laws, and you should follow them. They kind of vaguely fit the Noahide list, but not exactly. And some of them do trace, like, somewhat accurately. So it's possible that he is building on that. The problem is that we don't really have any early attestations of this. It shows up in the Talmud and things like that.
That's not true.
We don't know how organized this idea was or how diverse. Like, there might have been different.
Just to interrupt, there is earlier stuff than the Talmud. As I already said, Philo of Alexandria in 30 says that they were doing something like this, and in the Mishnah they mention. And what's the other one? What's the book that starts with? You actually talk about it often.
Gemara?
It might be that one, but like mention of that the descendants of Noah are only expected to follow Noah's rules is pre-Talmud. It's just very specific in the Talmud, right? So I'll continue.
Versions of what the list of Noahide laws were, right? That's entirely possible.
There was the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah is pre-Talmud, and
I can't remember whether the Noahide list is in the Mishnah or the Talmud. So the Talmud is a commentary on the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is what's called the Oral Torah. It was believed to be the teachings of Moses that he didn't write down, that were handed on, right? So that's obviously a myth, but that's what was believed. And so it was basically oral Torah. So it was like this oral law. It got written down before the Talmud did, but the Talmud, the Mishnah is kind of confusing, because it is very sort of bare bones. And so the Talmud came along to like comment on. The Talmud is kind of like the Supreme Court doing decisions and rulings about the law, and the law is the Mishnah, right? Like, so, or even you can think of the law, the Torah law is black letter law, and then you have early court rulings, which is the Mishnah, and then you have like Supreme Court rulings about how do you interpret the Mishnah, which is how you interpret the Torah. Anyway, that's how it works. And so but the point is, it's very difficult to date things reliably. There is a plausible case to be made that the Noahide law list goes back to Paul's time. But it's a little dodgier to prove that he's using that exact list, or if he's using the same concept. What is true, more importantly, is that they're already, before Paul, like Judaism was already, like you said, there's the Hillelites and the Shammaites. The Shammaites are hardcore conservatives, like hardcore conservatives.
Before he goes into this, let me allow you some time to, if you have anything to say, because he goes on to this.
Yeah, I agree with what he's saying. It's not like, what I'm writing about or what I talk about hinges on Paul knew of the Noahide laws. It was a solidified thing, and that's what he was doing. He would have called it the 7 Noahide laws probably if that was it. He was probably just part of this zeitgeist of evolving how the Gentiles fit into the world to come, as they say in the Torah. And it is Paul's same theme, though, of like having a Judaism for Gentiles where they don't have to keep the 613, all the commandments for the Jews, and keeping kosher and circumcising and all of that. So it is a watered down Judaism light version, as the Noahide laws are.
Yeah.
And I know, hold on, I'm pretty sure I've also read, I can't remember which book it is right now, but I've read that somebody was arguing about the Noahide laws being a very early concept.
Yeah, I've seen there's a very vague mention of Gentiles being half converted, and then, like I've said a billion times, Philo 3 times mentions the practice. But more importantly, the Torah implies it. The Torah, and so when we're seeing in the Talmud and all these other books, they're interpreting the Torah, and the Torah says that the descendants of Noah was given this 7th law, Adam was given 6 laws, and then Abraham is given a new set, including circumcision, etc. And the implication is that Abraham is the first Jew. And so if you're not a descendant of Abraham, it's already built in. So God, for some reason, comes down to talk to Abraham about genital mutilation. I don't know why he's not coming down right now. You would think that it'd be more important for him to come in the flesh right now and make an announcement. But no, he decided to come to Abraham and tell him to chop his dick off. And so, like, it's in the Torah, if you think about it. It's just it's stated very clearly in the Talmud and all these interpretations. But
right. And just because it wasn't canonized yet in the Talmud doesn't mean that there were. It's almost inevitable that pre-Talmud Jews were figuring out how they should deal with what they called God-fearing Gentiles and righteous Gentiles that believed in the God of Israel, because they didn't want them all just converting to and following all the commandments and being circumcised, because they had a dilemma. There's prophecies all over that all of the nations will recognize the God of Israel and leave their idols, but also they don't want the whole world converting to Judaism. So the solution was this Judaism for Gentiles, which is what Christianity is and what Noahide laws are.
Yeah, and you can see when this seems to have come into their culture is, my best guess is when Zoroastrianism gave them also the influences of heaven and hell, the Satan figure, etc., this sort of duality of having Satan as the trickster god and all that. They also have this exclusivity. Zoroastrians would see themselves as special over other people. And that actually led to their near extinction. Like there's very few of them left. And so you can see how Judaism brilliantly figured out the best of both worlds. They went, okay, yeah, that's not good. We can't just be exclusive. That doesn't work. That's not sustainable. We'll die out. But if we also create this secondary, and they also have a hierarchy. I'm not an expert on this, but there's a whole hierarchy within Judaism itself. They see it's just like, in Scientology, if you can afford to get to the Xenu stuff.
I don't know. I mean, hierarchy, it's like there's the rabbis and there's the students. I don't know exactly. Like there's advanced Kabbalah, 45-year-old, sages also, like the higher level of rabbis.
Right. That's kind of what I was hinting at. Like I've heard of people talk about that, and I don't want to comment on it because I don't know about it, but I've heard of that, what you just said, basically. And so I'm like, Noahide is just like the lowest rung. It's the lowest part of their hierarchy, seemingly.
Yeah, well, the Noahides, when you read, they base it on the verse where it says, in the end, what is it? 10 people from all the tribes are going to grab onto the tassel on their garment and say, "We heard God is with you." That they interpret that to be like that's going to be the Noahides in the end time. That was a favorite of Tovia Singer, actually, is those verses saying that that's describing Noahides, who I know you talked to.
I wish I knew what I know today when I talk to that dude, because there's so many things I need to ask that dude one day. I think it's too late. I think I don't have the invitation anymore, but yeah, I had no idea that he was literally recruiting Noahides. I didn't know that Noahide was still a practice today. It amazed me when you said something about that, and I looked, I'm like, really? I had no clue. I knew him from like Myth Vision, and I saw him like talking. I'm like, oh, it'd be cool if I got him on and started talking about the Noahide stuff in regards to what we're talking about. I had no clue that he, like when I saw the clip, the see through it all stuff, I was amazed. I didn't see that side of him when I was.
He's not always so candid about it, about Christianity's role in Judaizing the nations. He's not always so candid about that.
It's so funny when I talked to Richard privately about this concept, it was somewhat foreign to him. Like he to him it sounded like total crank. And when I told Tovia Singer about it privately, he went, "Oh, yeah, people are always talking about that." I'm like, "What are you talking about? People are always talking about that." And
Well, he's always bragging about it. All the
rabbis are always
Noahides
talking about it.
That's his whole shtick, is saving Jews from Christianity and then turning Christians, mostly evangelical Christians, into Noahides. He brags about all the numbers of Noahides he's converted.
And when he said no, but like in the sense that Christianity is a Noahide.
Oh yeah, I super chatted into Myth Vision and I said, "Is Acts 15 about the Noahide laws?" And he said yes.
Yeah, well, he said possibly, but I don't think so about Acts on my thing.
I don't think so. I think the 7 Noahide laws are found in Acts 15, but that's because of a major schism in the early church. That's no doubt historical. So in Acts 15, we discover that there were many Christians who thought that in order to be a Christian, now they didn't call themselves Christians, but we're going to do that because it's conventional, that thought if you want to be a Christian, you have to first convert to Judaism, circumcision, everything. So there's an ecumenical council in which it was Peter, Paul, they're all there. It is resolved that if non-Jews keep the 7 Noahide laws, they don't use that term, but you see the laws as you've articulated, don't eat the flesh of that was offered to idols, which Paul is going to just blow that off in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. Then you're good. That's all you need to do to be if you're not Jewish, to be a good Christian, nothing else. But I think the movement began at a time that's hard to imagine, in that the first third of the first century, the Jews were living under a brutal occupation of the Roman Empire. And there were battles, and people were just, how are we going to get rid of the Roman Empire? They're huge. And only God can do this. And people were running around saying the end of the world is coming. And if it was not for Paul, Christianity would have gone nowhere. Paul does something remarkable. And I don't mean that in a good way, but he does something remarkable. And that is he synchronizes. He synchronizes pagan ideas with Jewish ideas. And so one point your viewers must know is that in the first century, the only monotheism in the world was Judaism. That was there was nothing else. No one else believed in only one God, and there's nothing else. Okay, so Judaism was popular. People were converting to Judaism in fairly large numbers. However, people knew that the Jews were not just a religion, but we were also a nation. And in order to become a Jew, it's not that easy. And to keep the commandments is not the easiest thing. Circumcision is certainly not. So what happens if you're offered the following? If you're offered that you could essentially become the same, equal to the Jew, and you don't have to keep any commandments. And the whole reason the commandments were given is to show that you're a sinner. And you're all one in the body of Christ. There is no Jew or Gentile, man or woman, slave or free man. So, wow. So what Paul did was he's bringing Greco-Roman ideas, trying to synchronize it with Judaism, but he's essentially taking away the two stumbling blocks of what may prevent someone from becoming a Jew. Number one, people don't want to keep all those commandments. Today it's very easy to be a religious Jew, but then it may have not been that easy. And number two is you are heir to the promises if you're a Jew, if you just believe in Jesus. So bingo, that's what is his ability, because Christianity is inventing nothing. It's borrowing everything and then synchronizing everything. I mean, the Greeks didn't invent anything besides theater, but they're taking from all over the Levant and way beyond and transforming it into a way that what we know as Western civilization, just synchronizing that all. Paul is going to go with that. And once Paul comes in and synchronizes these ideas that were very attractive at the time, so bang, that would open up floodgates. And that's why his version of Christianity is adopted. That's why Galatians, in a way, is the most important of his books. I mean, Romans and Galatians, but Galatians, he really just very clearly lays all this stuff out. You don't have to keep the law. Don't be an idiot. Just be a good person. Don't get circumcised. That won't help you. And you're in the body of Christ. Bingo, you're set. So that Paul's the guy. Without Paul, he's the number one most important figure, not Jesus. Whoever Jesus was, he didn't do this. Paul did.
So let's continue with the rest of...
The Hillelites are very liberal, and in fact, when you look at the portrayal of the Pharisees in the Gospels, like Mark, even right out of the gate, Mark, the Pharisees that Jesus is arguing against in there are actually Shammaites, in the sense that they're taking the ultra-conservative position. And the positions that Jesus takes are actually Hillelite. So they're actually Pharisee positions, right?
And so this is infighting, because this is important, because a lot of anti-Judaism Christians really like to emphasize that.
Yeah, not necessarily. Oh, you mean nowadays they do?
These Nick Fuentes guys, they go, oh, that's the synagogue of Satan. That's not real Judaism.
Right.
There's this weird balance of like hating Judaism, and yet you're practicing the Torah and worshiping a rabbi. And it's hard for me to understand how someone could have that position.
Right. The internal criticism thing is true. Mark is creating an anachronism. Like what he's doing is ahistorical. Is that like if Jesus, for example, in the healing scene, like it's unlawful to heal on the Sabbath. Well, that's a Shammai position. The Hillelites were like, yeah, of course it's legal. You can heal on the Sabbath. So if Jesus had healed someone on the Sabbath, and these Pharisees came along and said, no, you can't do that, and Jesus says, but here's the reasons why. Obviously you can. Then there would have been a three-way argument. There would be the colleagues, the other Pharisees would be arguing with the other Pharisees. No, Jesus is right. And so the Pharisees would be arguing with each other. But no, that Mark portrays it as if the Pharisees are only Shammaites, they're only conservatives, but that's not the reality. And then you mentioned like Paul. See, the thing, Paul is sometimes assumed to be a Hillelite because the book of Acts says that he studied under Gamaliel, and Gamaliel is like the great-grandson of Hillel. Now, there's a lot of problems with that. Like, just because he's related to Hillel doesn't necessarily mean he is a Hillelite. He might be neither a Hillelite or a Shammite, or he could have switched to Shammites. We don't know. So if you're going to make an argument that Gamaliel himself was a Hillelite, you need to make that argument based on something other than his relationship.
And Paul never says that in his letters. That's only in Acts, too, which could just be fake trying to give him authority.
Yeah, and so like Paul... the character Paul, we don't even know if he's real anymore. He's saying that he was a Pharisee and that he's no longer, sort of implying like, oh, I used to persecute the Christians and now I'm different because I saw Jesus myself. And so to me, that doesn't seem like he's truly addressing what I'm trying to ask him, but it's interesting stuff.
Family relationship with Hillel. But the bigger problem is this is the book of Acts, and the book of Acts is full of shit. So the book of Acts makes stuff up. You can't believe anything it says. And this idea that he studied under Gamaliel is only in Acts. It's not in Paul's letters. Paul tells us that he was a Pharisee of Pharisees, but he doesn't say who he studied under. And it seems very weird. Gamaliel is super famous, so it seems very weird that he wouldn't say that I studied under Gamaliel, right? Like he would say that. The fact he didn't say that means I don't think he did, right? Like I think he studied under a bunch of dudes, probably none of them famous.
I'm trying to butt into him because he's going on this interesting information, but I'm trying to tie him down to the sort of the Christianity being a Noahide religion, and he sort of was trying to get him back in. But
it's all right. I like hearing him talk about Hillel, Shammai. What was Paul really? I find that interesting. I've heard theories too that they claim that. There's a theory that his road to Damascus is really on the way to the road to Damascus is Qumran, so that he might have been familiar with a lot of the stuff in Qumran, which we see in Paul, like circumcised hearts, law written on the heart. So much of Qumran we later find in Christianity. Like there's a New Jerusalem, there's circumcised hearts, there's the pillars and the 12 numerology. There's the anyway, I forgot the ones I already listed out. There's a whole bunch more. That's the next chapter, is the parallels in Dead Sea Scrolls and New Testament. New Covenant, that's the other one. Heavenly Jerusalem, New Covenant, that stuff also.
When researching like early Gentile converts and like the pre-Christian Gentile converts, you see the pattern is they were like, okay, I could do that. Okay. Do what to my dick? What? And like, that was the hang up. Like a lot of them like, okay, I could do the Saturday thing. I like that you guys don't work on Saturday. Now what's the other?
No. They're not supposed to not work on Saturday. They switch the Sabbath to Sunday.
Right. But if you fully convert, I mean, like if a Gentile fully converts to Judaism, they were like, and every time I hear circumcision of the heart, I have the worst imagery come to my brain. I see like, I don't even want to say it, but I just.
The Dead Sea Scrolls says the circumcision of the foreskin of your hearts. I didn't know our hearts had foreskins. Ooh. Very symbolic, deeply symbolic.
Yeah, don't type that. Don't ask ChatGPT to make that image. That sounds disgusting. Okay, so let's continue with. It just makes
realize that was bullshit and flipped sides, right? He's basically switched sides. So, but maybe he switched sides to Hillelites and then Christians. I don't know. Like we don't know because he didn't say right. So the reality is more complicated. But the idea of evangelizing Gentiles was Jewish and definitely Hillelite. And also there were like Jews who were neither Hillelites or Shammaites who also supported evangelization. So what Paul's doing is not in and of itself innovative. What's innovative is his suggestion that you can be saved without becoming a Jew altogether. And so, in other words, no circumcision. You don't have to follow the dietary laws. So, and it is entirely possible that he framed that as you can go back to the Noahide laws. He never says that. And so, like, that's kind of a supposition.
But it seems like the Talmud, which is the longest book in the world, was not written in a year. So when it's released, it clearly is older than that. All of these writings are old. We don't know precisely.
It's a complicated mess. So
when we look at the other things outside of the Noahide laws, it says don't make the Gentiles get circumcised. Because Noah, they didn't have to. Why would the Gentiles? And it says don't give them the Sabbath on Saturday. It says put the Gentile to death so don't take Saturday off, guys.
You're talking about the Talmud here? This is
the Talmud, and we don't know precisely what.
I haven't read those passages, so I don't know.
Okay, but just to add to the theory, it's all of these other things the Talmud says match up with everything Paul's saying. It says don't make them do the kosher laws.
Right.
Don't only give them that one dietary law. Don't let them take Saturday off as their Sabbath. Don't make them get circumcised. So it's like it strongly resembles what the prophecy of the world to come when it says that in Judaism that the righteous goyim will accept the Torah, but they won't be truly practicing Judaism, but they will accept that this is our God. And then the idea is like, it makes perfect sense. If you're a rabbi of Judaism, you don't want to give these goyim the same religion. You want to give them this sort of pacified version of it. Like, oh, don't defend yourself. Whereas in Judaism, it says, rise up and strike the person before they hurt you. Christianity is like, no, turn the other cheek. And so it's like this like neutered, peaceful version, strategically. Am I wrong there? Do you think?
That's in there for sure. Whether that was the like nefarious conspiratorial intent or not, we may not know. But that's up to people's opinions, maybe. But without a doubt, that is what's in Christianity, and it is a neutered love your enemy, be a good slave, turn the other cheek. In fact, Total Yeshu mocks that and specifically puts it in the context of a Christian and a Jew to turn the other cheek for the Christian. Interestingly enough. So they thought it that way. They thought it was absurd, and they're almost laughing. I could find the exact verse on that, but I wanted to mention. It was an easy ChatGPT search. Sanhedrin 58b says a Gentile who observes the Sabbath is liable for the death penalty, and other sources say that Shabbat is an eternal sign between God and Israel, not the nations. And then in the Midrash Tanchuma, it says non-Jews are bound only by the 7 Noahide laws, which do not include Sabbath observance. And in Total Yeshu, they also talk about how Peter switched the day of observance to Sunday instead of Saturday.
Yeah, and it's not the same thing. It's a half Sabbath. They're not really performing a Sabbath ritual. I mean, the Jewish version of Sabbath is a totally different animal.
Yeah, it's not like they can't do any work. They're celebrating on a different day. Also, Carrier mentioned there that he doesn't think Paul was the first to innovate like a version of Judaism or a semi-conversion of Gentiles to be Noahides. But also, I don't even think Paul says that it was his innovation, because he says that he learned things from revelation and Scripture, but that the super apostles, the apostles before him, added nothing to his message. And he says, I'm not teaching anything you're not teaching. So apparently even before Paul, there was some, and it's easy to see all the verses in this Midrash, the source material, where it would be for the Gentiles. It's clear over and over again, the Messiah is to be rejected and despised by the chosen people, and they don't understand the mysteries, and they're blinded and stumble and hardened, and it goes to the nation that did not call on God. Like Paul shows verse after verse of why this is for the Gentiles.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, he says that he was given the gospel to the uncircumcised with Barnabas. Obviously, the gospel of Barnabas is bullshit and created much later, but this Barnabas character and him are delegated as if they already had this thing, and like, okay, you go to the Gentiles. Here's your gospel. And I don't think when you first read that, if you weren't as deep in the rabbit hole as we are, you would think like, when you read him saying the gospel to the circumcised and a gospel to the uncircumcised, my first thought would be,
that's Acts too, by the way, which we're taking Acts for granted, which I think Acts is completely fictional. I think the story in Total Yeshu might even be the original and more close to what historically happened, and that also has Peter going to the Gentiles. And if Peter is supposed to be the first pope, he clearly went to the Gentiles and set up the Roman Church.
Yeah, and I also think that, okay, so
you see what I'm saying? So the idea of Peter being for the circumcised doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. There's conflicting explanations here.
Right. And also, just to add, like, the way I look at it is like, okay, we know this idea that there's the 7 undisputed letters of Paul, but I really don't want to throw out every other epistle as like completely later, because who knows whether they were corrupted or changed or rewritten with different language. So it's like, yeah, you could see how, like, as someone who speaks different languages, you see how like I could translate something to one language and then translate it back, and now it seems like someone else wrote it. And so I'm sure that there's a reason why they're seen as forgeries, but who knows whether there's a kernel of the original. There could have been a sort of influence, and they're later corrupted.
No, I for sure think they were all tampered with. Paul's authentic letters, the other epistles as well that are considered not authentically Paul, I think all of those. But I mean, even with the corrupted ones, we still see the remnants, the vestigial information in there that gives it away that it's clearly not talking about a biographical figure on earth until the Gospels.
So let's let him.
Yeah, there's a bunch of problems there. I don't know to what extent what you're describing is even in the Talmud. So to give you an example of what I mean is the Talmud has a lot of stuff about converting and the importance of converting, and even mentions the wish that everybody would convert. In other words, that the whole world would become Jewish. And so it has the opposite sense. So now if there's some other passage somewhere in there that has this completely opposite view, then you'd have to go find that passage and then ask who's being credited with saying that. Does anybody argue with him? Because the Talmud has like arguments. So it'll have someone makes a position and then someone argues against it. And so it shows a lot of debates between the Hillelites and the Shammaites in particular. But you have to like check what rabbi, what century is that rabbi from? What school is he of? And then what did the opponents say, and who are they, etc. So you'd have to actually like do an analysis, right? And so, since I don't know what passages you're referring to,
I don't want you to comment on something.
Yeah, I can't do that on the fly. I get that. But I would recommend that people need to do that before they say that. There is something that's true that comes close to what you're saying, which is, first of all, in first century Judea, there was massive diversity among Jews about all of this. Every single thing that you could think of, there was disagreement. So there's a sect for everything, right? So there could have been sects that were taking your position, and there could have been sects who were denouncing it. So you have to be aware of that. But one thing that I think is widely true, maybe not true of all sects, but of some, which is the Old Testament does predict that Judea or Jerusalem would rule the world, right, eventually, and that everybody would come to worship. Everyone in the world would come to worship there. And it does appear that there were some Jews who imagined that they would be like, the Jews would be the chosen ones, and everyone else would be like more like God-fearers, right? The people who respect and worship Yahweh but do not convert to Judaism. They imagined that would be the future. But I think there are also Jews who imagined it the other way around, that everybody would convert to Judaism. And then, of course, there's Jews who imagined that all the Gentiles would just be melted and there's no problem in the future. They wouldn't even exist in the future to be concerned with. And so, like, you have a huge diversity of views on this that you can't really peg it down. I'm not aware of any pre-Christian examples of Jewish thinking along the lines of, oh, we should make a fake religion to convince the Gentiles to adopt. I've never seen any evidence of that whatsoever. Whenever you talk, even in the Talmud, when you see passages that refer to the differences of the rules that are expected of Goyim versus Jews, it's always discussion of matter of fact. It's not a wish list. To give you an example of what I mean, like there's a lot of like legal discussion of what do you do when a Goyim is in your community and they break a law. What laws are they subject to? How do we try them? Like, so these are practical problems, right? And what laws can we enforce on them? So it's not, I just worry that what you're describing is a distortion, a signal distortion of these kinds of passages where they're talking about, oh, this is what we should do when we're in that situation. And somehow reimagining that as, oh, we should push this on Gentiles, right? Like, now maybe there's something like that in there. I don't know, but I'm not aware of it. I mean,
they call it an obligation to teach the world the Gentile, the Noahide laws, an obligation for them to follow it too. Like obviously, if they're not in the position to impose it on anybody, they're not going to impose it.
Yeah, and I don't even think that Richard knew. I tried to prep him for this. I don't think he realizes what I recently admitted to finding out recently, that this isn't some, because when I was asking him this, it was still in my head of this theory. I didn't know that they were still doing it. Now that we know they're still doing it, this is not crazy talk.
Oh, it's widespread. It's like their clearest objective is Noahide laws.
Yeah, and one of the things he says, I don't know if I skipped over it, but like he says like, oh well, there's history of them trying to convert Gentiles like completely, and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't really go against what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they never converted full people to full Judaism. Yeah, that is this arduous process where you have to do all this stuff. Yeah. But there was always this softer Noahide half conversion, and that's what Pauline Christianity was.
Noahide, hold on, sorry. The Noahide Christian solution probably came out of some Jews not wanting the Gentiles to fully convert because they're scared. They don't want all the Gentiles coming in and converting. Then they're going to take over their thing, and then they won't be the holy seed and the descendants of Jacob and the nation that shall dwell alone if the Gentiles can just mix in, you know?
Yeah, and if you look at what happened in Christianity, they kind of did do that. You know,
assimilation is their worst fear, and all the Gentiles becoming observant Jews is assimilation, the opposite of assimilation.
Another topic, we'll put that to rest. We talk about Christianity, its connection to Judaism, and we talk about Judaism. What are your thoughts on Islam? When I first started doing this, I had this dream of like, I'm going to talk to rabbis first, then I'm going to talk to, first I'm going to talk to my favorite atheist, Richard Carrier, then rabbis, then I wanted to talk to Christians, and I wanted to go through each Abrahamic religion. I had like 3 attempts talking to Muslims, and each time, even if they seemed like cool with it, it was uncomfortable and it went absolutely nowhere because they just simply won't take it's as if they're not in reality. Like when you talk to Christians, they have this way of juggling reality and Christianity. When I tried to discuss with
that's debatable.
Muslim,
that's debatable. I've argued with both. I think they argue exactly the same, and they have a lot of the same copes actually.
Like what I mean, like I would say something about like, so they would, one of them was saying, well, everything in the Quran is verified by science. And I would say something about science, and it was as if he was unfamiliar with like basic science. And I'm like, wow, like I don't even know how to deal with this. And so let's talk about Islam for a moment. Like, what are we going to do with this group?
It's another Noahide, just like Christianity is viewed as Esau. Ishmael is considered Islam. They're worshiping the God of Abraham. They believe they're even more Noahide in the sense that they don't have graven images. They don't have Jesus. They have Jesus only as a Messiah, but not that he is God. He's a prophet, and he's a Messianic prophet, but not God. They do believe he's going to return to defeat the Antichrist, the Dajjal. And they worship the God of Abraham. They believe in the oneness of God, so they're Noahide compliant. So they're also circumcising. They also have ritual kosher slaughter laws. They ultimately want the same thing, the God of Abraham and Jesus to return and rule the whole earth. And they believe in, they're just another sect of Messianic apocalyptic Judaism.
Yeah, and they both have this in common of like increasingly less tolerant of Judaism at the end, like the later additional books that not all Muslims agree on. That's where, just like the Gospel of John is the most edgy, the I forget the name of the latest.
They become more polemic as time goes on.
Right. They adapt to, they're trying to deal with their initial design. Their initial design is to see them as the chosen people. And they both have that ingrained. And so like they're trying to adapt and trying to get out of it, but its initial design is Noahide. And so even if there's no puppet strings and there's no calls to the rabbi, they were built. And I even saw some like early Christians talking about, because I wanted to know like what were early Christians saying about Muslims, and a lot of them were just straight up saying, "Oh, we know for a fact this group of Jews and this group of Jews were influencing it, and they were telling them that." Like they even talk about how Jewish people were influencing the origins of Islam.
Christians talk about how people were influencing Islam, or I assume they would say that they're influenced by Christianity and Judaism, and Christianity is influenced by Judaism. So I mean, it's all under the Abrahamic Torah-rooted umbrella,
right? But like as far as the world we live in, it's like when I'm seeing the people that are concerned with Islamic immigration in Europe and whatnot, and they're sort of associating Zionism with the solution to that. And so it's like,
or Christianity. They say Christianity is the solution to it.
Yeah, and it's like there's this false dichotomy where it's like we have to choose between jihadism or Zionism. If you don't choose, it's like, okay, and like how do I balance that decision?
How about either way, you're still following a Jewish religion too? That's the real problem. And the rabbis know this too. They see this, and the conflict between Christianity and Islam they see as prophetic, and they see as beneficial to them. And it's the Gog and Magog war is between Esau and Ishmael, Christianity and Islam.
And so, if we were going to draw a plan of what these end prophecies are actually trying to describe, to be clear, are we going to say that there was actually this idea of let's take two portions of the Goyim and pin them against each other? Did that happen coincidentally? How close to the sort of Isaiah and other prophecies do you think that, how much of an influence was the origin of these Noahide religions with this sort of end goal? It seems too grand of an idea to attribute to someone.
Like Carrier said earlier, I think it's messier than that. And I think like they're calling audibles. And it's not like one centered conspiracy. It's more like many different moving levers shared by like a common motive, which is all just rooted in the scriptures. Believing these scriptures are divine, believing that prophecy is real, and these are just all the manifestations of it, and they're in flux, they're changing, and everything is dependent on interpretation and whatever people believe it is, really, because that's all it is at the end of the day. So did they come up with the plot before for Christianity and Islam, or did it kind of just organically happen and then they steered it a little bit or reinterpreted it to, and then that changed the path that it was on, the trajectory? I don't really know. It's what I do know though is that, well, all these scriptures where Jesus clearly comes from, every single time it's, unambiguously conquering the nations. That is the common theme that's pervasive throughout. And we can prove that.
Yeah, by its very nature, a cult is a pursuit of control to some degree. Sometimes it's a small-time cult that is pursuing the control over 20 agreeable New Age people that have expendable income. Then it could be Islam, where it's a gigantic nation, international cult. And all three of these Abrahamic religions and let's not forget Mormonism and all the other little Abrahamic cults out there. I want to give them some love too. They're all pursuing control, and they have to tolerate each other. They would love to, I'm sure if they could, they would be the only ones, and they're all pursuing control in the world. Judaism is a pursuit of control. Christianity is a pursuit of control, and so is Islam and all of these. And they dance with each other. They interact with each other. We see the wars happen. We see this guy seems like the Antichrist. This guy seems like the Messiah. But they're all independently pursuing control, and they have these connections. But there is a large amount of coincidence, but not so much coincidence that we should dismiss these connections. Like there is this central theme that the Torah as a fundamental ground for all of these different cults, but they are, whether or not there is a call to the rabbi, there is this sort of cooperation to where we can start with one dot. We know that most Christians do cooperate with this plan. And so we can start with that dot. If it wasn't for that dot, it would be crazy. But we can see in real time, Christianity does cooperate. Most, despite all of these edgy East Crusaders, most Christianity results in a cooperation with this overall thing. And so we can connect dots. We don't know precisely where the connections are, but the end result is there.
Exactly. When you know the end result and you know the source material, like having to know every little meticulous nuance detail with stuff that we'll probably never be able to prove, we can only speculate. I try not to get caught in the weeds too much with that stuff. But there's so much material that we can see and can prove that like speculating is almost, it's fun sometimes, but
yeah, we can have fun of like, okay, when was there crossovers? When did this guy become a converso crypto Christian? And we have all these connections. We can like make specific connections. We can show when Jewish Christianity fades out, all this stuff. We can show like modern days where the Vatican collaborates with Israel and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, we know what we can hang our hats on is Christianity does result in an attitude towards this plan that has emerged from the Torah that I don't think would be there in its absence. If Europeans and most modern first worlders were not indoctrinated with this story, it would be so foreign to them that they would be like, you see it in cultures that are not Christian. They're like, huh, what's going on? And we're like, oh yeah, well, we've read about this sort of thing in the Bible. And so the effect that Christianity does have, regardless of what the connections actually is and the prophecies and all that, it's important. I'm not sitting here trying to get people to stop being into Jainism or Buddhism, or to me, it's vital that this Abrahamic nonsense stops, because that's actually resulting in people being killed. It's resulting in political decisions. It's resulting in bad things.
I agree. It's a messianic apocalyptic death cult that dominates half the world and has shaped human history. And not only is Christianity a fraud and a forgery and a deception and fake history, but so is the Old Testament, which isn't that much older than Christianity, actually. Like the famous Orwell quote says, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Well, how many people today believe of this fake past of the patriarchs and Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and Abraham and Moses? So they're controlling the present because of that, and the future with the future prophecies. So I think that quote from 1984 fits perfectly in with religion being this fake history that so much of the world believes as dogma. And it does have like go ahead.
Like I was reading the part of Paul where he talks about collecting from the Gentiles the donations to send to Jerusalem, to the poor people of Jerusalem. And it's like, man, we're still doing that.
He was actually talking about Jewish Christians there, though.
Okay,
But
yeah.
the concept, though, of share their
22.
material blessings because they got the spiritual blessings from the Jews, though, that is definitely is a concept.
An undisputed letter, or whether I was reading from one of the other epistles, but there is a thing where he's talking about the Gentiles need to contribute too. So like the Gentiles did, he's like, they need to put something aside and whatnot. But yeah, it's this tradition of.
He wasn't saying give it to the Pharisees, though. He was saying give it to the Jewish Christians. That was the context of that.
And regardless of what he was saying, we know that Paul lies.
Well, Jesus also says in the New Testament, follow what the Pharisees do, but not, or what they say, but not as they do. That one's pretty.
Yeah. It is interesting in its design on how it, yeah. And so what is to be done? I think if we knew the answer, we couldn't say it on camera.
You know, listen, what is to be done? We need to liberate the world from this mythology. And if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, like Christianity has a monopoly. They used to burn critical books, burn heretics. Everybody was illiterate. They didn't have books. The church kept it away and kept it in Latin, and not everybody was reading books. So they didn't get the full picture. They couldn't analyze this stuff. Not until the last few hundred years in Enlightenment and stuff did any of this criticism, biblical criticism, start to happen. The internet's only been widespread for about 20 years. Carrier and
Right.
No, Earl Doherty have only written their books within the last few decades. So
Yeah.
I feel like the dam is breaking right now. Christianity is already mostly in decline. And once the old guard and the gatekeepers and the status quo biblical studies start to fade away a little bit more and are challenged more by some of the more modern scholarship, I think the house of cards could collapse. The emperor wears no clothes, and this figure, Jesus, is a mythical construct, and we can see the intent and the motive from the source material is clearly for theological conquest of the nations. That's what every verse links back to every single time.
Criticism of Zionism has become almost mainstream at this point, and we know the dark days where it was absolute. You know, it was dark to say anything in criticism of Israel, and now, so that's becoming normal. But the issue that we're running into is that and I thank Nick Fuentes and anyone else that's put their neck out and risked themselves to criticize Zionism, but it's almost as if when you criticize that and then provide another ism, it's like when you're trying to leave the airport and you take the exit that just brings you right back to the airport. It's like you're telling people to get off the highway and you're just getting right back on.
Pulling the wagons.
You're not actually helping. I think he's brave. I think you're a great speaker, and I'm in one way thankful. But this idea that that's the solution, you're just going back into the same nonsense.
Yeah. Are you really against Zionism if you still want all the world to worship the God of Zion? Are you really anti-Zionism when you won't criticize the Torah? Are you really anti-Zionism when your biggest problem is the chosen people rejecting their Messiah that was meant to conquer the world? I don't think so. Just another flavor of, let's not call it Zionism, another flavor of Messianic Judaism. When you frame it as Messianic Judaism, how are Christianity and Judaism are both Messianic Judaism.
Yeah, and even if they're completely separate and have total autonomy and there's no calls to the rabbi, it's like they're set up, they're different tables at the same bazaar. And yeah, they throw shade at each other and they disrespect each other, just like the different denominations within Christianity do, just like the different forms of Judaism do. And so it's just another grift. It's another pursuit of control. And so, like, I was watching, speaking of Mr. Fuentes, I was watching him debate that little blonde guy. Have you seen that debate where
Dean Withers?
Yeah. And so, you know, I would love to just play clips. I'm not going to do this, but I thought, oh my God, I could maybe clip what Nick says in this debate and have you react to it. But the problem with it is that the other guy was not giving him good stuff to react to. But at the end of the day, Nick's overall argument in response to what his opponent was providing is, first off, he says the Shroud of Turin, and that's just, I don't even know where to go with that. It's just carbon dated to not be 2,000 years old. I think, was it 1300 was the carbon dating? It's so
by 3 separate universities too.
Yeah, and so that's so absurd that I don't even want to waste time talking about it. But then his next thing was a common cope, and he goes, oh, well, the alternative is liberalism, and that's caused this fall of civilization, and without any objective source of morality, the absence of religion leads to a bad society, and he sort of attributes liberal America and Europe to the absence of Christianity, which is funny because it's like cultural Christianity, absent of the religion, seems to result in liberalism.
Yeah, just Christianity, secularized Christianity just morphs into liberalism. That's it. That's what led to liberalism.
Exactly. It's like it's just like secular Zionists have a culture. You get rid of their actual religion, and they still, you know, like the Bolshevik revolution and the Zionism, and like you see imprints of the concepts of Judaism are embedded in their secular thought. Just like you and I, we're ex-Christians. We probably have senses of guilt, senses of compassion if we were born in Japan, we might not have the same mentality if we were just born secular or with, you know, Shintoism or something. There's an imprint on you. We can spend all day trying to get away from it, but we were raised with these beliefs.
Yeah, very true. Very true. And a lot of former Christians end up swinging extreme, the pendulum swings extreme to the other side. And they feel like they have to repent and make up for their like anti-Christian LGBTQ views or things like that, right? And then they feel like it's their role that they have to counteract the extreme Christian right also.
Right.
And that further radicalizes them and pushes them to the left.
And so the little blonde guy said, he mentioned the sort of Moses commanding the murder of the children. And he says, you know, the worst thing that the Old Testament has to offer. And Nick basically is like, oh, well, modern Catholics don't believe in the Old Testament. And that's occurring in a fallen world. That's not relevant today.
Yeah. The fallen world cope.
So what would you say if we had someone say that to you today and you're debating, like, what's a good
I mean, it's not like God told Pharaoh to slaughter all the kids, though. That was Satan. That was Satan trying to stop the redemption of the Moses redemption or the Jesus redemption. Is that what he really brought up? He brought up Pharaoh?
Not the Pharaoh. No. So in Numbers, forget the number, when the Moses commands them to go back. Why have you not killed the woman and children?
Okay, genocide and slaughter.
The girls that have not been with a man as your wife.
You're right. That makes more sense. Gotcha.
And so Nick's like, oh, well, you know, that's the Old Testament. Yeah.
Still what your God commanded. Is Jesus not the God of the Old Testament? He says, I am. He says that is his father. That's such a cope when they say, oh, but they'll cite the Old Testament when it's advantageous to their argument and then ignore it when it's not.
It's perfect. They always have the option select. And it's like, I could say, oh, well, in Matthew, Jesus says, I did not come to change the book of Moses. But then they'll say, oh, well, Paul says all this stuff in the epistles. And so there's always this way out to anything Jewish in the Gospels. There was clearly more Jewishy Gospels like Matthew and the other ones that are lost to time. And they have this get out card when they talk about these differences that were given to the Noahide practitioners.
Yeah, that's right.
So thank you very much, Adam. Your book is on the way. What is do you know the name? Jesus Deception. Awesome. Okay. Adam has a show. Check him out. No More News. And you can see
nomorenews.org to find all the links.
nomorenews.org almost every day. Incredibly riveting and exciting stuff. And I thank you, Adam.
Thank you. Great talk. Fun talk.
Thanks, bud.